Start out with a couple of questions. Question number one, who has ever taught Jeremiah? What age group?
Kids, obviously.
No, not obviously. Kids. Could be adult women.
No, it was children.
Children, okay. A children's study on Jeremiah. One teacher. So how many folks have attended a class on Jeremiah? One? Okay, that's kind of what I expected. Not large numbers. We're going to help change that. Oh, by the way, I've never taught Jeremiah either. So this is my inaugural session. As we begin our class this morning, let's bow for a word of prayer. Dear God, we come to you in prayer this morning to thank you for this beautiful day of life that you've given to us. We're thankful for the changing of the seasons. We're thankful for the health that you've given to those of us who are able to be here, those who are attending online. We know that there are others who are in difficult situations in hospitals and other places. We ask you to reach down and heal them. Those who have lost loved ones or are going through other difficult times, we ask that you reach down and grant them peace and comfort at this time. Help us as we open your word, as we study from your prophet Jeremiah. Help us to learn the truths from this book of prophecy that you would have us learn. We lift up this prayer to you through the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Whenever I see someone walk in who does technology stuff, it kind of scares me. I think I'm on. I think you can hear me. So that's good. Most of you are familiar with the game of Family Feud. You've seen it on television. There's home edition as well. We're not going to play it the way they play it on television, but let's pretend that there's a survey that's been taken. And the survey is the top 5 reasons to study the book of Jeremiah. What would those reasons be? To learn. Okay, to learn. That's not why we're doing it, but that would be a reason if you were at Harding or Abilene Christian or at another seminary or Bible college. Yes? Bingo! One of the major prophets. That makes it on my list of top 5, so Pat, thank you for that. Jeremiah, we read very quickly in verse 2, chapter 1. If you haven't turned there, please do. Jeremiah 1, verse 2, the word of the Lord came to him being Jeremiah. Verse 4, the word of the Lord came to me, Jeremiah speaking. It's in the Bible. I thought that would be the first one that you all mentioned. It's part of the Bible. Another reason, Jesus often referred to the law and the prophets. If we want to know what Jesus was talking about when he referred to the prophets, we need to know what the prophets teach us. As Pat mentioned, it's one of the major prophets. That means one of the lengthier prophets. So if we want to know what in the world Jesus was talking about, we need to know what at least one of the major prophets talked about. Some say that Jeremiah was the major prophet because he wrote the lengthiest. Isaiah has 66 chapters, I believe. Jeremiah has only 52, but the folks who count words say that the number of words in Jeremiah are greater than the number of the words in the book of Isaiah. Probably one of the reasons why only one of us has ever been in a class on Jeremiah is it's often overlooked. It's often overlooked because it is so long. There is no way in the world that you can cover 52 chapters of a major prophecy in 13 weeks, and we only have 12. I'll get to that reason at another class. So that's why we're doing a survey rather than a study of the book of Jeremiah. Jesus not only referred to the law and prophets, Jesus quoted from Jeremiah when he was cleansing the temple, and that's in Matthew 21, verse 13. You can find other accounts in the other Gospels as well, except for in John. Jeremiah was quoted or referred to in other places in the New Testament, Romans and the book of Hebrews. Understanding, and this might not be one of your top reasons for looking at Jeremiah, it's one of my top reasons. It's a challenge. It ain't easy. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend like it is easy. Some of the challenges that we have, and one of the reasons why I gave you some handouts, is to kind of help us get through some of these challenges, help us to understand some of these challenges. One of the challenges is the fact that it's not written in chronological order. We like for things to be written in chronological order. An example of that is in your handout materials. I have stolen or borrowed a chart, and I didn't prepare it as a chart. It's page 2 of your handout, possible timing of Jeremiah's prophecies. Not all scholars agree. They don't even come close to agreeing. In major parts they do, but on the edges they don't. Chapters 1 to 6 and 11 and 12, Josiah. Those prophecies were made according to Mr. Dyer, Professor Dyer, in Josiah's reign. But let's drop down to number 2, Jehoahaz. Only part of chapter 22 and all of chapter 26 came within his reign, according to this professor, this scholar. But look at all of the other chapters that came before chapter 22 that he assigns to Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, his son, and Zedekiah. They're not in chronological order. Poetry. I don't know about you, but I have problems with poetry, and a lot of prophecy is poetry. We are not going to try to figure out what every word of poetry means in the book of Jeremiah. We would get bogged down in chapter 1, and we might not leave chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Well, that does not accomplish our purposes. So we are not going to get bogged down in what every poetic phrase means. Writers of poetry are known to use figures of speech that don't mean much to us in the 21st century. They are known to use poetic license. They're known to use hyperbole. They're known to do a lot of things that would be challenging for you and me. There are a lot of geographical references that don't appear in your maps in the Bible. So Jeremiah uses words about places. You can't figure out where it is unless you're looking at a commentary, and the commentators, as is typical, don't always agree 100% about where that place is. Some are known. Many are known. And the important ones to us in our review are known. And often it's hard to know exactly who's speaking. Is it God speaking to Jeremiah? Is Jeremiah speaking for God to the people? Is Jeremiah complaining to God? Are people complaining to or against Jeremiah? Sometimes that's kind of difficult to sort out. Now, the gospel writer, when he was talking about it's time to leave the milk and get difficult, deal with the challenging things, he wasn't referring to the book of Jeremiah. I realize that. But for us as Christians in the 21st century, we need the milk, but we need the tough stuff too. So that's one of my reasons for looking at Jeremiah. Let's look at the first 3 verses of chapter 1. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah, and through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. Okay, I gave you another chart. That's the back of your page 1. That's behind the syllabus. And the reason why I gave you that chart is to give you some idea of when these five people reigned, whether they were good or evil. It's just coincidental that the last time I stood before you as a teacher, I was teaching about King Josiah back on November 26th of last year. Josiah was the last good king of Judah. All of the 4 kings that came after him did evil, as this chart shows you and says. An important reason for us knowing about these kings is that most of them, except for Jehoahaz, who's referred to, I think, only once in Jeremiah, and that time he's referred to, at least in the NIV, as Shallum. Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah are referred to many times. It's also helpful to understand how long these guys reigned, because we know that Jeremiah started his prophecy in the 13th year of Josiah. Josiah reigned for 31 years, so 18 years were left under Josiah's reign, and then you add up the rest of the years, we know that at least 41 years Jeremiah was a prophet to Judah and to some of the other nations, primarily Judah and Israel with some measure of frequency, and then the nations around. And we're not going to have time to get into all of that, but hopefully we get a chance to get into some of that. Jeremiah, we learn, is from a priestly line. Whether he was ever served as a priest or not, we don't know. We know he spent 41 years plus as a prophet. We know he was from Anathoth, and that's going to come up from time to time as we look at the book itself. Where Anathoth is, it's northeast of Jerusalem in the tribe of Benjamin. That the territory is assigned to Benjamin. Abiathar was one of his ancestors. Abiathar was banished by King Solomon to Anathoth because Abiathar and King Solomon weren't on the same line. Okay. The first 3 verses of chapter 1, which we just read, as well as chapter 52 of the book of Jeremiah, probably were not written by Jeremiah. We have a pretty good reason for believing that 52 wasn't written by Jeremiah, because at the end of chapter 51, here end the words of Jeremiah. But chapter 52, in an indirect way, may have been written by Jeremiah, because many, the tradition is, the Jewish tradition is that Jeremiah wrote 1st and 2nd Kings. Chapter 52 of Jeremiah almost exactly mirrors the end of 2nd Kings. So likely it was added by his scribe, Baruch, or another scribe, but we know that Jeremiah himself would have been dead by the time that chapter 52 was written. So indirectly, he probably wrote it, but directly, he did not. We're not going to take the time to look at Jeremiah 16, but we learned in Jeremiah 16, the first two verses, that God told Jeremiah, don't marry and don't have children. So he lived probably to be a senior citizen. He was probably in his 60s when he either died or was killed while he was living in Egypt. Chapter 36 is a very interesting and important chapter. We're not going to take the time to read it this morning because we're concentrating on chapter 1, the foundational chapter of the book, a chapter that kind of provides a summary of what the rest of the book is all about. But chapter 36 is interesting because it tells us that God directed Jeremiah to write down his prophecies on a scroll. So Jeremiah dictated, we learned through the first four verses of Jeremiah 36. Jeremiah dictated those words to his scribe Baruch. A little bit later on in chapter 36, we learn that as those words were being written to the then king, the king was taking a knife, cutting off the words from the scroll, 3 columns at a time, from the scroll, tossing the scroll that he just cut off into the fire. So the king destroyed the prophecy of Jeremiah. But God is not going to be defeated. At the end of chapter 36 of Jeremiah, God directs Jeremiah to take a different scroll, add back on that scroll, or write again on that scroll the words of his prophecies. And it goes ahead and says that he added some words as well. So probably the rest of the book of Jeremiah was added at that time. Okay, so we've covered the first 3 verses of Jeremiah 1 quickly. Let's get into some more meat. Let's read verses 4 to 10. The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. When did God select Jeremiah to be for his prophetic ministry? Before he was born. To whom was Jeremiah to serve as a prophet? Say aloud. All nations. So not just Judah. Now we know from reading the rest of Jeremiah, and we'll get into this and you'll see it, that he primarily prophesied to and against and about Judah. But he also included Israel, the 10 northern tribes of Israel. He also prophesied about or against Philistia and all the cities and towns there, Ammon, Edom, Moab, and a lot of other nations, Egypt as well. So how did Jeremiah respond to God's words of appointment? I'm too young? Can't do it? What were the other words he used? Can't speak, can't talk. Who else responded that way that we know about? Moses. So Jeremiah kind of goes along with a common objection. I'm too young. I can't speak. Or I'm maybe a guy in my age or older. I'm too old. People just tend to have objections when God comes calling, don't they? How did God respond? Three ways at least that God responded that are acceptable answers. Okay, don't be afraid, I'm going to protect you. What else?
He said he'll have the authority, he'll have protection, and he'll have the sword.
Okay. Okay, God reached out and touched his lips and said, I have put my words in your mouth. Who or what does that remind us of? Or should remind us of? Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6. Very similar. When God filled the temple and called Isaiah, seraphim took hot coals and figuratively or literally, I don't know which, but touched the lips of Isaiah. Very similar circumstance. God also responded to Jeremiah by saying, don't say you're too young. Does that, not those words exactly, but does that remind you of anything in the New Testament? Timothy, exactly. When Paul, in fact, it's in your bulletin today, the quotation, not because I asked for it to be in there, and I can't find it quickly, but the announcement about the second Sunday. The verse is quoted right there. So, yes, Paul writing to Timothy. What is the mission that God gave to Jeremiah? The NIV uses the word appointment. It means the same thing. He appointed him over nations and kingdoms. Okay. Now, my version, and I'm going to read it exactly the way my version says it. After saying, I put my words in your mouth, he says, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to do three things. Number one, uproot and tear down. Number two, destroy and overthrow. Number three, to build and to plant. What, mathematically speaking, what was the greater of the two missions given here? Well, build up and plant is constructive, right? It's constructive. That's 1/3 of it. So that's the lesser of the two. So if constructive is the lesser of the two, what is the greater of the two? destructive, destructive. We've got 2/3 destructive. And as we look at the book of Jeremiah, we're going to see there's a lot of destructive talk. That is the primary, those are the primary words in the book of Jeremiah. And you will even see, as we, in coming weeks, you will see those words repeated. Not all of them, not all at the same time, but in different locations. Uprooting and destroying are throughout the book of Jeremiah. All right, so we're just swimming in time, right? No, never. Let's look at the two visions, beginning in verse 11 through 16. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? I see the branch of an almond tree, I replied. The Lord said to me, you have seen correctly, for I am watching to see that my word is fulfilled. The word of the Lord came to me again. What do you see? I see a pot that is boiling, I answered. It is tilting toward us from the north. The Lord said to me, from the north, disaster will be poured out on all who live in the land. I am about to summon all the peoples of the northern kingdoms, declares the Lord. Their kings will come and set up their thrones in the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem. They will come against all her surrounding walls and against all the towns of Judah. I will pronounce my judgments on my people because of their wickedness in forsaking me, in burning incense to other gods, and in worshiping what their hands have made. Okay. This first vision is the vision of the almond tree, and God talking about watching. There's a play on words, and there's some other $10 words that the commentators use. If you look at the Hebrew, and there's probably a footnote in your NIV text that talks about this, the word almond tree sounds like watch. And if you look at the spelling, the anglicized way of spelling of those two words, you can see that it might sound alike. In English, I think we call those homonyms. An example, the word no. Unless you hear the context of the word no, you don't know what's being said. No, don't do that. Or I know this is the real deal. Okay, well that's apparently something similar to that is going on here. Other commentators also make reference that the almond tree buds early. It's the tree that buds the earliest in the spring. Why that is important here, I scratch my head over. That's what they say. They say that's important because it suggests that this is coming soon. And other explanations that just go right over my head. So we're not going to spend any more time on that. If you want to talk to me about it later, you can. The second vision is probably, in my mind, the more important of the two. The boiling pot from the north. What does the tilting pot represent? Danger. Absolutely danger. Would you like a boiling pot spilled on you or toward you? Danger, yes, absolutely. There's some other words that we might use to kind of expand on that concept of danger. In this context, most likely what God is referring to through this vision is judgment. And whenever judgment is referred to in Jeremiah, they're not talking about a good result. They're talking about the destructive aspect, the tearing down, the destroying, the overthrowing, the uprooting and tearing down. So this boiling pot in verse 14 is disaster. Disaster is going to be poured out on everyone in the land, and this is specifically talking about Judah here. What else does God say is going to happen as a result of this figure, this boiling pot? Destruction is going to come.
Their kings will set up their thrones outside.
Right, these northern kingdoms who are coming in to do God's work for him, these northern kingdoms are going to set up, the kings are going to come and set up their thrones in Jerusalem. And of course, Jerusalem at that time was the capital city of the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. So if the kings are there from these invaders, that tells us what's going to happen with the Judean kings, right? They're going to be kicked out. They're going to lose their position. It also says that the towns around Judah will also be conquered. What three reasons does God give here for the judgment against Judah? Verse 16. Go ahead.
Idol worship.
Idol worship. And probably idol worship subsumes or encompasses the three reasons. Exactly. To remind you what is said in verse 16, I will pronounce my judgments on my people because of their wickedness in forsaking me. I think that could be a little bit broader than idol worship, but most commentators disagree with me. In burning incense to other gods, it's something that we're going to see a lot about in upcoming weeks, and in worshiping what their hands have made. They made the idols, yet they worship them. And in coming weeks, we'll see that referred to a lot as well. I want to look at a couple of scriptures that are outside of Jeremiah now. A couple of scriptures that should have been well known to the people of Judea. The first, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on, the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Remember those? Do you think that the children of Israel, the people of Judah, would have been exposed to the Ten Commandments? Exodus 20. I'm not going to read all the verses, but they go down through verse 17. Beginning in verse 1, and God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above or in the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord, am the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. And it keeps going on from there. They should have known what the Ten Commandments said. Proverbs chapter 6. Other words that likely they would have been exposed to at time. Verses 16 through 19. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. They should have been exposed to those. They should have known what those words said both from Exodus, which is basically repeated. The Ten Commandments are basically repeated in Deuteronomy. I believe it's chapter 5, maybe it's chapter 6, I'm not sure which. But anyway, the Ten Commandments, they should have known the Ten Commandments. Many of them, if not all of them, would have been exposed to the Proverbs and what was said there in Proverbs 6. Okay, finishing out chapter 1. Picking up verse 17. Get yourself ready. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. Today I have made you a fortified city and an iron pillar and a bronze wall to stand up against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Okay, so in these verses, 17 to 19, what is God telling Jeremiah to do? What are the first things he tells Jeremiah to do? Sounds pretty simple, pretty basic. Go speak to them. Okay, tell everyone. He uses some other basic words before he tells them to do that. Get ready. Prepare yourself. Some versions say get dressed. Very basic. You can probably pay more attention to me after I'm dressed than before, right? Yes. Get ready. Another thing that he tells them, very basic, very foundational. Stand up. You can hear me better by me standing in front of you than if I was sitting down. Likely. That's why I usually stand up when I'm talking to people. Where else do we hear or we read about being told to stand up? Very good. Ephesians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul. That's not the only place. It's repeated many times through the writings of Paul. Stand up. And it's more than just stand up like I'm standing up. It's the idea is standing firm, being solid, don't back down. That's the concept. What else does God say there? It's related to bravery. And I'm not going to tell you because it's there. Exactly. And I wanted the full picture to be painted, so thank you. He says, don't let them terrify you, or I will terrify you. Don't be terrified of them, or I will terrify you, is probably actually the way it says, right? What did God do for Jeremiah the same day that he's delivering these words to him? 3 things. We're running short on time. I'm making you a fortified city. I'm making you an iron pillar and a bronze wall. Why would he say those things? Descriptive terms for how God is going to protect him. Fortified cities are harder to overrun than unfortified cities. You know, you can drive your tanks right into an unfortified city. Now, who knows what's going to happen after you do that, drive them in there, but if it's got a wall around it, you got to tear down the wall before the tanks can go through, right? Pretty simple. Walls of Jericho. Go back to a little bit earlier history. Before the Israelites could conquer Jericho, those walls needed to come down, or they had to scale the walls, one of the two. It's safer when the walls are gone. Okay, so God is making Jeremiah solid and strong. Fortified city, iron pillar. It's kind of hard to knock an iron pillar down. That's why after 9/11, we saw sometimes little, but anyway, you go to Walmart today, you're going to see some stuff out in front of the Walmart to keep a car from just driving into the front of Walmart, right? That's the same idea. And I don't know if those are iron pillars. I don't know what they're made of. It doesn't really matter. They're tough. They're protective devices. Well, God's doing that for Jeremiah, and he tells him that. What was God's purpose? Somewhat repeated. What was his purpose in telling Jeremiah those things?
He could stand against those who oppose him.
And he promises Jeremiah, you're going to be opposed. These people are going to come after you. And he starts, who's going to come after him? Number one, the kings, right? The top dog is going to be after you. The head guy. Who else? The officers or officials under the top guy, they're coming after you. Who else? The priests, the religious guys who are supposed to be cheering you on and helping you. They're going to be coming after you. And finally, the people. So, who's left out? His mother. Okay, very good. Thank you. His mother. And that might come out in kind of a different way, Wes, but yeah, his mother's probably not against him. But hold tight till future verses and chapters, you might change your mind on that one as well. His mother likely was a person from Anathoth. That's the why I say that. So God assured Jeremiah, you're going to be persecuted, but I am setting up a protective wall around you, and no matter what these folks do to you, I'm going to rescue you. So go out and do the job I gave you. Okay, in the few seconds that we have left before we hear the second bell, does Jeremiah chapter 1 teach us anything that we can learn or use as Christians today? Answer is yes, so what are the lessons? Expect adversity. Expect adversity, and God's on your side. That might be the most important thing that we as Christians today can get out of here. Another important message or lesson that I kind of hope we can get out of here. Any other ideas? Okay, God will protect us. Another one that I think is important. Exactly. God has plans for us. Not only was Jeremiah commissioned, we're commissioned. And I didn't write down all of the places in the Bible where we're commissioned. Some might say Matthew 28, beginning with verses 18, going through verse 20. Okay, that's our second bell. I can't talk for much longer. There's what I headed on page 1, a proposed syllabus. Proposed because it's likely to change. It's likely to change because we're over time already, and we're only lesson 1, and we only covered 1 chapter. Kind of thought that might happen. Next week, some of you might be shocked to see that we're going to jump in lesson 2 to chapter 11 of Jeremiah. I also want you to look at Deuteronomy 28, because they're related, I believe. You might disagree, but so look at Jeremiah 11, Deuteronomy 28. For extra credit, look at Jeremiah 12 because we might get there. Who knows? I reserve the right to change our schedule at any time. I'll try to keep you warned if we need to do that. Thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing you next week.